Right, so in the last lesson, we extended the scene. Good way to get goods from one point to another is through water fares, waterways. So in this tutorial, in this lesson, lesson 30, we are going to add a harbor to our scene. And then eventually we'll add a boat and a jet. We are going to add elements to the scene that will help us extend this scene even further or utilize this scene to the maximum. So to create the harbor, I'm going to create a new layer right at the top. I'm going to make it a fill layer. I'm going to give it a bluish gray color. This is going to be my rough drawing. I'm going to invert that, and when I paint with black and white, which white will reveal and black will erase, so you'll see white adds and black erases, we are going to start designing our harbor. So I think a good place, and that's why we do the rough, so that we can see where we need to edit and alter our scene. So I think this is the edge of the harbor, and then we've got the depth of the water, I would say to about there, and then so that's the bottom of the harbor, or the basin of the harbor, right? And then we will need a cornerstone or curb area for the harbor. So, and then the depth of that. So a stone would look like something like this, and maybe this overhangs a bit so that we've got let's imagine if we had to cut this. So that's our stone, it goes in, and then it overhangs the water a little bit, and then we've got the basin. So we need to move this a little bit inward. So right, but this will make sense when we get to that. For now, we just need a rough drawing for what we want. So let's make that 3 pixels, create a new layer, add a fill layer, and make it black. And let's call that harbor drawing. Control I to invert the color from the mask from black to white, or from white to black. And let's continue with our harbor rough drawing. Just want to lighten the drawing a little bit because I want to start adding detail to this now. Right, so and because ships and nature and all the water's movement will drag more silt and soil into the harbor, this will not be a straight line. So we will make this line jagged to imply that there's sand and soil riding up the wall underneath the water. And we can have rocks, pebbles, all sorts of other stuff underneath the water as well. Now we're just going to focus on creating the physical assets for the harbor. We'll add more random stuff later on in the water. So far so good. Right, so onto my harbor drawing. So the drawing itself, remember this is a fill layer. So it's a single full color layer. And to draw on that, we are going to use black and white. So just to make life easier. So if I draw and I make a mistake, I can just press X on the keyboard and erase, and X again to paint whatever I need to paint in or draw in. So let's make the ISO grid a little bit more opaque so that we have less of the background hindering us. Right, so let's make this part. So let's add the coloring and shading to the scene now. Right, so just let's select the layer underneath your harbor drawing, and we're going to use the lasso tool like usually to fill in to use a fill layer to create our color for the stones. Let's create a new fill layer. Before we do that, let's disable the grid. Let's add a new fill layer and make it a nice brown color. Let's make it similar to that, but slightly darker. Maybe less, more of the red, more towards the red, and maybe a little bit more saturated. Right, so I'm happy with that for the moment. All right, so we basically need to create what the same highlight and shades that we've done for the cards. So let's call this harbor base color. Duplicate that and call it harbor shade. Ooh. There. And right click properties, make it slightly darker. Okay, and now we are going to use the brush tool, set to black, and erase the highlights. Just going to change it to a slightly lighter shade color. I think it's just a bit too dark. That should be okay. So we've got that done now, and now we've got to do the wall and the sand. So I'm going to create a fill layer for each of those. Now remember, the water is coming up to the bricks. So the bricks will be underwater and will be influenced by the density of the water. So we are going to give it a greenish blue color. Now keep in mind, water is transparent, but due to the way light interacts with it and the density and the impurities in water, the color of water will change according to circumstances. Now, think about it. When you mix blue and yellow together, you will get a green color. And that's why sometimes in tropical areas, you'll see that the water has got that greenish turquoisey tint. and that's due to the sand underneath the water. The water's characteristics of taking on the colors of the sky, the ambient sky, that sort of thing, and that all adds up to that greenish color. So I'm gonna follow that principle and create an underwater translucency to our scene that gives off this greenish bluish tint. But again, I'm going to use my lasso tool to create a selection for this, and then use the fill layer to get that. All right, so to save myself some time, I'm just going to make a stretch selection right through all of the stone. I'm going to make sure that I put it underneath my stones so that I don't have to meticulously follow that edge. No, let's pick a color like that, and then I'm gonna make it slightly more turquoisey, maybe more like that. And let's remove some of the saturation. Right. Okay, right. So what we now want to do is we want to add another layer for the sand. So this time I will need to do the selection trick. So let's do that quickly. We can duplicate that. No, let's create a new layer. Fill layer. Let's select that. Now we can change it. Maybe something a little bit more towards the green. Right. Okay. I'm gonna make the wall layer slightly darker. Right, and okay, and on top of that, so let's duplicate this layer. Let's make that layer slightly darker still. So slightly darker and a little bit more towards the blue. Okay, and then using the lasso tool, select the whole body, delete that, and then using the brush tool on a low opacity, I want to paint in some of the shaded colors, the shadow colors. So I want a shadow color underneath this part, and I want a bit of a darker color at the bottom. Right. Then I'm going to do the same with that layer, so the top layer, the sand layer. Let's change the color to a slightly darker version of that. And then I'm going to invert the selection. Make sure that you've selected the, let's call that sand layer, sand base layer. Right, and then I'm going to do the same, paint a bit of shades and texture into that layer. I guess at this point you're looking at me and telling me, Rian, this is not looking like water. This is just colors that's on top of each other. So let's select that, and let's call that water let's call that underwater. Underwater. All right, so now I remember way back in another tutorial I showed you, but that's a tutorial, different tutorial. Way back in a different tutorial in a different life, I showed you, and I'll put a link here if I remember. If I don't, just let me know in the comments that I forgot to put the link in the description, where I show you how to create a pattern, a seamless pattern. And that's what we want to create now, is we want to create a seamless pattern for the refractions or the shadows underneath the water. So create a new document. Let's make it, let's see, centimeters or millimeters. Let's make it 100 by 100 millimeters. Yeah, leave it at 300 dpi or pixels per inch and create. For this, all right, so that's fine. Let's delete that and create a new fill layer. Give it a deep blue color, something like that. All right, okay. And then invert that layer. Now, if you press Shift W on your keyboard, you're going to get this. You can see now it's a seamless. If I do this, let's draw a circle in that corner and across here, and maybe a triangle in that one and a square in that one. If I press Shift W, you can see that it is now a seamless texture. So, but let's select all, Control A, and then press delete to delete that. Maybe we keep the selection so that we can see where we need to paint. We're going to disable that later on, but for now keep it on. Right, so now create think of a mover shapes, something like that. That should make for a nice seamless underwater pattern. Right, but we want to just make it a little bit more organic, so I'm going to make sure that I don't have too many sharp corners. Okay, and you can add bits of shadow and refraction in that as well. You can keep this simple, you don't have to go as complicated, and you don't have to keep it as simple as I do, so you can overcomplicate things. It's your scene, you can make whatever you want it, do it in whatever way and style you want. Press Shift W on the keyboard again, and maybe all right, so yeah, disable the background layer. Make sure that you've got that selected. Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, and then let's move back to our drawing, and Control V to paste it. Right, so now we've got that. Now, Control O, copy, then paste it. Oh my soul. Right, so I think we need to get rid of that. So using the marquee tool, make sure that you've got that selected. Hold Shift to make sure it's proportional, and Shift Control I to invert. Press delete on the keyboard, and hopefully it is a single layer now. So Control T, make that slightly smaller while holding Shift. Then Control J and let's move it over. So that we can double it up. Control E, Control J. Control E. Right, so there's our water, our shadows and ripples for underneath the water. I think that should work. All right, so now we need to enable our layer, our grid mask again, our grid. Where is our grid? Right, now make sure that you've got the ripples, ripple shadows selected. Control T, rotate it to make it fit the grid. Right, and then using the skew tool, we want to make sure that it follows the grid in that direction as well. Press enter on the keyboard and let's see what this looks like. Just want to make it slightly smaller. Press enter, then duplicate that, slide it over. Right there. Merge that. Duplicate it again, slide it over, match it up. You know the drill by now. Right, Control E. Right, let's lower the opacity. Let's try some of the blending modes. Let's see what happens if we do that. Screen, maybe saturation, no. Overlay, I think that's going to be overlay. Right, let's add a transparency mask to this. Transparency mask, and then let's remove. Because we've got this, let's put this here. Right. Right, so let's select that layer. Press Shift Control I, invert the selection, make sure that you've got the mask selected, and press delete. Okay, now we want to have that same shadow against the wall. So duplicate that, Control T, and maybe we tilt it that way. Something like that. I'm just going to extend it a little bit. Press enter, and make sure that you've got the mask selected, and now we want to delete that there. Delete. Right, and then we want to delete that as well, so make sure that you've got the lasso tool, select the whole thing at the top and press delete. And let's disable that layer. Right, so that's part of creating the water. All that remains is we still need to do the part where we create the ripples on top of the water. So let's try that in this document instead of trying to do that in a different document. So that's the shadow ripples. Let's put that together. Control G. No, it's not going to work like that. So let's, yeah, just keep it there. So that's underwater, and that's ripple shadows copy. Right, so create a new layer at the top. Yeah, let's make it a full layer. Add a full layer. Pick a turquoise color. Something like that. Bright turquoise like that. Make it almost white. And then invert the color. And now we're going to do the same as we've done here. Creating all sorts of ripples, and then we'll skew that to fit our grid. So again, paint that almost like amoeba shapes, like so. Right, so far so good. Let's enable these layers again. Let's Control T this. Again, transform it so that it follows the grid. Speaking of, let's enable the grid. And then Control T. And let's undo that again. Let's enable the grid and Control T to transform that. Right, so let's put that there. Control J, move it over. Ooh. So let's move that over. I'm gonna fiddle with that. Maybe we don't use that one. Control J, bring it over. Control J, bring it over. Right, so let's erase some of these lines. I think we need to darken some of this. So back to this, I'm going to put it back to normal. The same with that one, normal. I'm going to group that together, group, and call that underwater shadows. Then I'm going to lower the opacity of this slightly. I want to go back to the underwater layers, and luckily, because we've got these as fill layers, we can go back and change the properties of this. So I think we need a deeper blue for all of this. Right, it looks like swimming pool colors. We can tweak this until we are happy. So fiddle with it until you feel that now that looks good. Right, so we've got that as a separate layer. Maybe we just bring the opacity lower. And then for the ripples, let's call this water surface ripples. I'm gonna put it below our harbor drawing so that it goes underneath the stones. And we want to lower the opacity as well. No, you know, we want this. We want this on top of the drawing because we want to obscure some of these lines. So, but for that, because we've done that, we now need to create a transparency mask. Make sure that you select the stones layer and press delete on the keyboard. Now, another property of water is that it is very reflective. So at the moment, let's say harbor stones. We see water and none of the qualities of water. So I want to duplicate that, the stones, bring it down. Come on. So bring it down like that. Put it on top of the water surface layer. Lower the opacity quite a lot. See there? So just lower the opacity quite a lot. And then create a transparency mask. Make sure that you select the stone, the harbor, the stone layer. See that layer. So make sure that you use, no, not that one, this one. And then on your transparency mask, press delete. Okay, so that's step number one. Step number two is we still need to get rid of the drawing part of this. So using my lasso tool, I'm just going to select this. And press delete. So now we've got the stones reflected. We could even bring back the opacity slightly more. Right, so surface ripples, and I want to create a little bit more randomness to this. So create a new, not a paint layer, create a new fill layer, make that much lighter, maybe a little bit more blue. Okay, invert that layer, and then we want to add a few more detail to the water, a little bit more detail to the water. Okay, so keep in mind that this is not the only way to paint water in isometric. This is just one of the ways we can do this. So let's see if we disable all of this, if it looks a little bit more like water. Yes, I think it looks like water, more or less. Like I said, there are other ways to do this. There might be better ways. Right, so one of the things that we are still not, that I'm not still happy with is the underwater part. So I'm going to create a new fill layer, make it a brown color, like so. And I'm going to just press Ctrl I to invert the selection, then use your lasso tool to select this part of the scene. And Let's Control I that. Change the mode. I'll leave it at normal. Let's reduce the opacity so that we can make the water a little bit more dirty. You can see that it looks a little bit more dirty now. I want to reduce the opacity of the surface ripple a little bit more, and then sparkle as well. Right, let's disable the grid layer. And I think that looks fairly okay. If I find another way to create water, I'll show you how to do that. But this is step one. So next step is to introduce a boat into the scene, maybe smaller boats, and maybe a jetty of sorts that we can bring in here as well. So now we've got a lot more options in the scene just by creating this harbor part for our scene. Right, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you liked it, please consider subscribing. If you learned something, please give it a like. And if you want to see more like this and be notified of new uploads, remember to hit the bell button at the top. See you in the next lesson.